السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أنا منال الدباغ، وأهلا وسهلا في بودكاست لنبدأ الحوار Start the Conversation. الهدف من البودكاست إنه نبدأ الحوار في مواضيع مختلفة ما أخذت حقها في مساحة الحوار أو ما في أحد يبغى يتكلم فيها. المواضيع مختلفة لكن كلها بتدور حول كيف نقدر نعيش بكليتنا مش كأجزاء متفرقة في تناغم مع الناس حواليننا والبيئة. الفضول والشغف هو اللي خلاني أبدأ البودكاست، وهو اللي يدفعني لاختيار المواضيع وضيوف البودكاست. مرة تانية أهلا وسهلا، وإن شاء الله تلاقوا شيء مفيد في الحلقة. وإذا في أي مواضيع تحبوا تسمعوها أو أشخاص تحبوا تسمعوا منهم، أتواصلوا معايا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. حلقة اليوم حتكون باللغة الإنجليزية. ضيفتي تشاد لي من سنغافورة، مدرب كوتش معتمد من ICF ومدربة Leadership Embodiment. في حلقة اليوم حنتكلم إيش هي Leadership Embodiment. ويندي بالمر هي اللي أسست هذا التدريب، يجمع ما بين الحركة، كيف إحنا بنكون في جسدنا، تواصل مع الجسد، والإدارة، وكيف نقدر نكون قائدين في حياتنا العملية والخاصة كمان. حنتكلم عن Leadership Embodiment وحنعمل شوية تدريبات بسيطة. إذا في أي سؤال وحابين تعرفوا عن Leadership Embodiment أكتر وبالعربي تواصلوا معايا. شكرا. Welcome everyone for another episode of Start the Conversation. Today I have Chad Lee, a Regional Director of Leadership Embodiment in Asia, and we will get to what that is in this episode. Dedicated to personal growth for 25 years. She's an ICF coach, PCC. I met Chad in 2015 when I did my Leadership Embodiment Level 1 Goa, and since then we had kind of a mutual interest in changing the world and sharing embodiment with other people. Chad, welcome. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Manal. Thanks for having me, and I wish you a very happy new year.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. I don't know if this is the first session of the new year, but I'm wishing everybody who's listening in a really wonderful start to your decade.
Yeah, and we're recording this pretty close to the Chinese New Year. Is that correct?
As well, yes.
Yes.
That is coming up.
Happy New Year in all years. Okay, Chad, shall we start with your own journey of the past 25 years, and how are you doing what you are doing right now?
Mm-hmm. I'll be very happy to share what comes to me each time something that a little different comes up. For me, I would say on the professional level, I often just share, it's been 25 years. I've been on my own growth path and really been intentional about my personal development. Really, I've been somebody who's been very sensitive to myself, others in the world around me ever since I can remember. I would say the age of reason. So it's been really ongoing as a conscious being. And as an adult, I have, like everybody else, have had some challenging times and I'll really start this conversation around that professional period, where I could see how I was torn between quite a few things. So I'm Singaporean, having grown up in Singapore, and then I've been away, as have many of my peers, to a foreign country. In my case, it was England, and then been back to Singapore after for my professional life. Had a very international and successful at the time. Beginning on a fast track in a fast moving innovation technology work. And I think having been at that time quite sensitive to the speed of things around me, demands that would be made of me having a certain vision of how I would like to contribute. I think I could see some things would potentially be conflictual to how I was as a person and how I would be needing to show up in the professional world, at least at that time, the world as it was. So, so I think that really, how would I say? I think these days they call it the quarter life crisis because I was in my 20s. But, of course, obviously that's a bit mythical because no one knows if we're really going to live to 100. So, but the idea is that I definitely felt like that's not a trajectory that I'm just going to let be. But, let me take an interest and let me be more intentional about the choice I'm making and look at myself and start resourcing for ways that I can live a much more fulfilling and skillful way. And a lot of that came through embodiment, which I very quickly, as life would have it, have had opportunities again and again to encounter and learn with, and have my own personal setbacks show up in those ways.
Okay. Wow. I'm sure your journey have taken you through different modalities with embodiment and elsewhere. For the space of time that we have and our intention for here, let's start with leadership embodiment, the work of Wendy Palmer. Do you remember like a defining space between, before leadership embodiment and after, and how did that kind of impacted how you work?
Okay, so short answer is yes. Short answer is yes, and I can say that I have had periods of my life where I've had, those times in our lives when we have personal elements and the professional elements, everything seems to be showing up and you feel a little bit squeezed, like in those, I don't know, you've got these music videos when you've got walls squeezing on you.
Yes.
And the space seems to be, so it's a little bit that period. I had a period like this. This was quite recently after I encountered and I began, after we met. It wasn't the year we met, it was after. And then quite a few of these elements showed up. At that time, begun on my on practicing leadership embodiment, and I felt that it's funny. I mean, some of those aspects which showed up were things I thought I had worked on before. So it's like those moments when you think, well, I thought I learned that lesson before. Why am I here again?
Yeah.
So, and so when I had, challenges, I'm going to give you a couple of examples to make it more concrete. So I would say, in situations of professional challenging leadership, where I disagreed with direction, and felt like there was, I think that's probably a accurate way to describe it. And then also just seeing how the organization was and wanting to put my own voice to it, and finding a real challenge in speaking up with integrity. And I felt that leadership embodiment came to my life at the right time, because that had begun the practice. So I was able at that time to practice it with something very real. And maybe it was much more challenging than I thought, because I was up against some really challenging stresses. So this is not just in the leadership embodiment work. I was actively at that time contributing to the we call it LE, growing in its very first steps in Asia. So there were teething things that came up. One of the challenges was we're going to set up a retreat, and then 2 weeks before the retreat there was a volcano that was sort of on again, off again, not sure if it was going off. So, I'm talking about, in a way, that kind of stress, and then also other things which were more emotionally fraught around group dynamics, people, and so on. So things which are very real for everybody. And I think when a lot of this happens all together, we have to respond under pressure. And, the call is to be embodying all these qualities we harp on about and tell people about. We really got to live our thing. And so, so that was the call for me to show up, speak with integrity, listen with centeredness, and to be able to be as inclusive as possible.
So let's start or begin with what is leadership embodiment. And I would have to guess most of our listeners would not know what embodiment is, or the definition that, LE uses as embodiment, because there are so many definitions that is out there. If you could tell us about, what is leadership embodiment and what is the definition of embodiment in that context?
Sure. Embodiment has, it's a very wide blanket term, and there are many, many different ways in which it shows up. The way we talk about it in leadership embodiment is that it's not just what is felt within us, it's also how we show up. Mm-hmm. So it's about how we are able to show up to and be seen and felt by others. And we speak of this in the context of qualities. Mm-hmm. So we work intentionally with identifying the qualities that we'll like to embody more of. And then in leadership embodiment, we work with form.
Okay.
This is a form which is inspired and drawn from Aikido and mindfulness, and which is grounded upon many neuroscientific discoveries in recent times and even less recent times. And so the form then provides us a way to practice. So despite ourselves and despite our reactionary patterns, we can still, in the face of stress and pressure, like some of those I described earlier on, be able to show up. Okay. Not just, have a thinking of, I want to be more compassionate, for example, but then how would I be able to embody that compassion so that it shows up in a way that is seen and felt by others?
Yeah. And I know and correct me if I'm wrong, the qualities that Wendy Palmer, founder of Leadership Embodiments, highlights, or that's kind of correct to say the slogan is noble, awesome, shiny. Can you tell us more about the being noble, being awesome, being shiny, and how does that contribute to showing up in life? And if you want to go more personal on how it impacted you.
Yeah, that's a little short form, I would say, yes, that we use in leadership embodiment. So for short, we call it NAS.
NAS, okay.
NAS. Yeah. And I'm so glad you remember that.
Yeah.
It's a lovely shorthand. And I don't know if you know the little anecdote, how that came about.
You could remind me, and I'm sure our listeners don't know. So go ahead.
Okay. So Wendy shares the story of how her Japanese Aikido teacher was training them. So Wendy is a 6th Dan, black belt Aikido master. And among the many Japanese teachers that she trained, one of them was watching them train. And at first, so Wendy and her peers were a little bit stiff. So he, corrected them. And then later, after he corrected them, they all became too loose, and he corrected them again. So he was a little bit, I guess, frustrated. And the way she expressed it was how, because his English wasn't his native language. So he said to them, I want to see you noble. I want to see you awesome. And I want to see you shiny.
Oh. So
that really primed on her, and she's been sharing that with her students. And it's a way of pointing to how in leadership embodiment, we're first centered, so being vertical in our energy, so that uplift. So as we breathe up through our spine, and you can practice that as you're listening now, breathing up through your spine and being more upright, that uplift is the noble. And then as you breathe out, expanding, looking at the space around you, that expansion, that's the awesome, that radiating feeling. And then as we settle, that's the shiny. That's us. We're shiny as we are. So that's the way I have interpreted noble, awesome, shiny for myself. And so it's that verticality first, that uplift, that awesome, that radiates out, and settling, we're shining.
That it feels good. Even me now doing, this conversation with you, it feels like it has a different sensation and feel of like, oh yeah, I'm noble. Even though that I've heard these words, I haven't practiced LE diligently, but Wendy's work is something that I go back to very often, and she's the teacher of many of my teachers. So it's a nice reminder. And can we do a short kind of instructional kind of exercise? Can you do something with us, with me and the listeners?
Sure, I'll be happy to. But even as you were saying that, that feeling of, I felt really connected when you shared what that felt like for you. As I described what Noble, Awesome, Shiny was, that sense of connection. That's what we're going for, that sense of interconnectedness. Immediately we are connected already. We don't have to manufacture any kind of connection because the connection's already there. And I think that's something very beautiful that Ellie's touched me with.
Yeah. So let's do an experiment. I don't like calling them exercises. We could do an experiment. Yeah.
Sure. So all of us out here listening, I'd like to invite you to think about something in the last day, the last couple of days. It was the weekend just that you can think about if there was something that felt a little bit annoying for you, or that maybe someone said to you, had a little look, a little something, not too much, but just a light something that made you feel irritated or frustrated. And just think about that for a moment, bring whatever thing that comes up to mind. Usually it's the first thing. And then exaggerate a little by tightening up your body. Not that you were doing it then, but just, whatever is your close position. So what I'm doing now is I'm clenching my fist and I'm just kind of slouching a little bit because that's what I do. I close up in some way. And every of us has a unique and different way of reacting with tension. So see what you are like and just, have a look at yourself now. What's that like? And then bring yourself to that moment and feel a bit of that oop. Okay. So now I'd like us to just relax that enough. And we open up again. By opening up, I mean just if you were extra tense, then just come back to normal. Nothing special. And what I'd like us to do now is to be sitting upright. And as you breathe in, I'd like you to imagine breathing up through your spine. So Christmas or Chinese New Year or whatever festivities, we usually have lights, right, of some sort. So to some of the friends here, I sometimes tell them, oh, it's a bit like, having those Christmas lights or festivity lights lighting up your spine. Children really like that because they see the bling, bling, bling going up their spine. So imagine that bling, bling, bling. It goes up your spine. And as you do that, you breathe up, becoming more uplifted. And then as you breathe down through your front gently, like a gentle waterfall, and it's very warm around your heart. So opening your eyes if you have them shut, balance your space out left and right. You can have a look left and right. What if there's as much space on my left as there is on my right? And then the space in front of you. What if there's as much space behind you too as there is in front of you? What does that feel like? And if you look up, you'll see the space above you. What if there's as much space above your head as there is below you? What does that feel like? And then you're thinking of something that makes you smile, bringing someone or something that makes you smile and actually smile. And then now I want you to think back on that thing that made you irritated or annoyed and tell me what that feels like now.
Feels like, meh, okay, whatever. Very less charged in some way. And I'll have to say, I've done this myself many times, and I've done it with clients many times, this simple exercise. And it almost never fails that there is a difference to come back, and just changes my perspective of how things are. And you said space many times, and this is one of the things that I really got from Wendy, is the space, and letting the space kind of not take over, kind of carry us and helps us. One of the things that I find myself sharing a lot from that training is when she talks about difficult conversations and how we can, or getting feedback, and how we can let the whatever is said lands in space in front of us. And then we can, look at it, see what works, have some kind of a distance. Could you tell us more about that? Because I'm sure you get more on that than what I remember. But I remember that was being a powerful image that is really helpful as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So what I've just coached us to doing is our centering practice, which is really, I would say, the heart and soul of leadership embodiment. And then the other aspects of the build on that, and as we grow in experience with the practice, we come back to that no matter what. My joke's like, when in doubt, center. And what you just described, when we're having a difficult piece of criticism or feedback to receive, that's something which is, a real lived experience in not just our professional spaces, but also our personal spaces. And perhaps, the more things mean to us, the more sensitive we could be to what that is. And so how could we be more skillful in receiving that feedback, and even to, I would say, change our perspective to what feedback is? Is it something which is, something's out to get me and telling me how not good enough it is? Or is it something which I can use and improve upon? And in leadership embodiment, the great leaders are those who are able to be receptive to feedback, even invite feedback and work with in skillful ways. And it's so important for creativity to be able to be having this capacity to embody centeredness in our listening, so we can speak ideas into being. People are going to feel you as, I am not even going to go there. You're going to have wonderful ideas sitting with all of your collaborators, and people are not so willing to be speaking up their craziest and perhaps most ingenious ideas. So there's a real opportunity there for great leaders to be able to embody a presence that listens people into their greatest ideas, and then magic can happen. So about the centered listening, the sense of, if we just take something which is not so working with, the little weights in the beginning, something everybody can do, just thinking of something which is light, not so important, that, we don't want to hear so much. And then this idea of having something we don't like so much to hear land in the space, and instead of landing on us.
Yeah.
So in LE, we work with that really in a spatial way, and we can use visualization. But the main thing is that we work with something light to start with, and then having that really visually be in the space between you and an imaginary other, or, we work in roles in our exercises, so somebody you're working with, and to have that land in the space instead of on you.
Yeah.
So in other words, we're not taking it so personally.
Yeah.
And then, it's not like we're in denial, like, oh, that didn't get me at all. It's more like, oh, and then just be able to feel like, to be able to notice, we feel the impact of that, but then that ability to remember to center, and then to have this form that I've just described us through of, what you said about noble, awesome, shiny. So our particular form of relating to space. In other words, we're not organizing ourselves around that negative feedback anymore. We organize ourselves around space and let the space take all that extra pressure, and and charged emotions. And there's just so much more capacity that we can tap into. And in fact, that's what we all kind of just did just now. Because it's the same thing. Whatever is the content, there's something which is a stressor, be it something annoying, irritating, or distressing in some way, such as a negative piece of feedback in a difficult conversation. That's what gets us triggered. And then our ability to notice as soon as that happens and be able to have this wonderful habit of being much more skillful with it, and rather than being wrapped in our organizing around that, we switch our physiological orientation to space differently and our attention too.
Space is our friend.
Yep.
It's awesome. I just love Wendy's work, honestly. And I really recommend everyone reads at least Leadership Embodiment, her book, because it's very easy to read and simple. It's accessible. That's the word I'm going for. One of the things that I've experienced, during the training, now I come from a dance movement background, and there's a lot of flow and a lot of self-expression. And when I did the training, it was kind of more of a corporate business oriented. And it was the first time that I see this kind of work tap into, corporations and, that kind of business environment. And that was quite fascinating to see. And I think that's one of Wendy's accomplishments, is taking it sort of in a mainstream, not just martial artists and dancers. How is your experience with doing this work in corporate environment?
I think what's coming up for me is that it feels like more and more the time for this being needed. So I always like to start with myself, as the first person who's got to be doing my work before I share that out there. And I would say from my own lived experience as a professional, that boy, are we under a lot of stress, and boy, are we, in very fast moving environments. This was late 90s. In the early 2000s, I still remember that magazine cover. I think it was a Time magazine where mindfulness became on the cover. I think it was in 2004, perhaps. And then there was what they call the Mindfulness Revolution. And I'm recollecting for myself how things came together, and some of the earliest people who studied with Wendy in what was then called conscious embodiment were leaders. And were seeking for their own ways of well-being and being more skillful. And I think in reality, none of us split, how would I say, like compartments, like there's a work you or a professional you, and then there's a you, and so on. So it's that all of who you are in my coaching discipline, which is called integral coaching, that's, and many other forms of coaching out there. I believe more and more people are talking about this kind of holistic way of looking at ourselves. And I think leadership embodiment definitely is, embodiment itself is a way of paying attention to that, of integrating the different aspects of ourselves and addressing that. So we're not just walking around like, brains on legs, which we are not. And that's not healthy and sustainable in the long run. So I would say that, for working with bringing this in a corporate environment, that it's felt natural, and those who are open to it show up and ask and have been inviting. And the proof of it is how leadership embodiment's seen a lot of exciting growth in and more so in Europe and in the US, where it's been for a longer time. And in Asia, we've been since those beginning days in 2015. Here we're into our we're entering our 5th year. So this is exciting that this, we've been around, and I'm really committed to growing the communities of practice, because a lot of this is about keeping our practice going and not it being a nice, corporate retreat. We have, 2 days of feeling relaxed, so to speak. In LE, it's not for relaxation. Mm-hmm. It's not even, as we say, for happiness, but it is about being more skillful, paying attention to ourselves, that self-care, and being mindful, but in an embodied way. And it's such a gift, it's such an act of generosity for ourselves to pay attention to how we show up, as opposed to vanity or, showing up so that we have, one up it, and therefore more excellent, in that way, that performativity way. Mm-hmm. This is about embodying that self-care in a way where we're not unnecessarily draining ourselves of energy that's unnecessary. Then we're more available for ourselves. We're more available for others that we care around us. And then, we're able to have much more meaningful conversations. And especially at work, where we have just so many clients who say they've just too many meetings or meetings after meetings. And why is that? Are we saying what really needs to be said? And are we really speaking in ways which are integrous and moving forward positively? And so these all take those qualities, the deeper qualities, which we talk about. And, you talked about slogan in the beginning. So these are practices for presence, confidence, and compassion in a deep way to show up. And we're more effective.
Yeah, I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate here. And if I'm a skeptical, corporate executive or person, and I'm going to say, so why do this? What's the benefit? And how it makes a difference if I come to this training or I do these practices of centering, and why be compassionate at work if things work anyway?
Well, I have a personal way of responding to that in this point of my life. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'll necessarily say this to a corporate would-be client, mm-hmm. but this is what's coming up for me now. And I think it's for all of us just to remember about in the last year, one of the things that really came up for me was loss. Mm-hmm. Was losing some people in my community, in my professional community, in some tragic ways. And it really was a wake-up call to some others in the community too. In fact, I remember the first time I had to teach leadership embodiment. Once it was a level 1, once was a level 2, and these events had just happened like within weeks off. And I remember how I didn't think that I was actually that affected of losing people in my community. But then I realized how affected I was. Because we were working through the exercises, and I could feel the loss in affecting my body. And then I thought about these people, who just didn't have the energy to go on. And I felt, wow, that's real. Think about their families. And it's so important, this resilience. No matter what stresses we're up to have that bigger vision of, what really matters, and then have the wherewithal to be with our states of overwhelm, of stress. Who knows what was going on, for them. I mean, this is sounds, kind of, I would say, it sounds heavy to start the year with, but in contrary, I'm inviting us to see the preciousness of life and the preciousness of and the realness that we all, and the higher up we go, guess what? There's going to be more stress. There's going to be more anxiety. So this is really, I find this world's really about growing our capacity, and then, helping us be much more much more resilient, and able to, if I was speaking to that skeptical corporate person, professional in you, and I'll say, yeah, that what really matters, that you want to you want to inspire others and you want to inspire yourself. And if you really want to make an impact, then the time is now. So it's really an invitation to be more skillful in the true message that you want to put out and have more clarity about what you want to, what you truly want to say, have that aligned with what your body is saying. As we know, they say at least 70%, I've read in an article, even up to 90% of what you communicate is happening through your body.
Yeah.
So it's not just content anymore in this day and age. The content data, we got it out there. But, to be inspiring for yourself and others. And I do stress inspiring yourself because, that takes so much energy. And then to, so that we can truly live into our potential and also be able to feel much more, fulfilled in the many hours that we spend at work. Well, make that count and make that pleasurable too. I think, we're coming from cultures where, hard work and efforts very much extolled and that kind of excellence. And pleasure is very much sort of like, it's, and I'm saying, all for pleasure. But when you're spending that many hours at work, then you want to also, have skillful way for it to be pleasurable moments with all those that you spend that with at work and at home.
I think beautifully said and answered. Not sure a skeptical corporate person how much they will get, but I got a lot from it, and I hope the listeners got a lot from that answer. And really, I think now even corporate world everywhere is getting the burnout, the negative side effects of the fast pace, highly achieving, that it's all about, bottom line. It's all about what gets the work done. And in the way of that, we experienced a lot of losses, health issues, family issues, and all that. And this is a call of, and you said, integrating our whole self. So it's not going to work because Manal is going to work, and that's a separate Manal who stays home and be with her family or goes out with friends. And that seems like a more interesting way of living. If I'm having pleasure at work and having pleasure elsewhere in the world, doing whatever I'm doing. One of the other things that I got away with Leadership Embodiment is what Wendy calls the posse. And that is really says a lot about the truth of that we can't do anything alone in this life. We need people. We are always standing on someone else's shoulder, and to have that as a sort of reinforcement, I found it really valuable. Can you let the listeners know about this posse idea of or practice of Wendy and Ellie?
Sure. This is one of my favorite areas of LE. I mean, all of it's great, but we were just talking about inspiring ourselves, right? Yeah. And so, and people get this. So a lot of people come to LE saying that I want to be more, I want to learn how to speak up in a way which is much more compelling and be inspiring for people, be an inspiring leader. And so, in LE, one of the tools that we use is what you've just said, using a posse, which is not a lot of people understand in our culture. So just for the sake of our listeners, because it's not home for everybody, it comes from Wendy's roots. Wendy, who's American, and in the Wild West, if you've watched some of those cartoons or Western movies, you have a posse who like the sidekicks of a sheriff. So the sheriff's like the chief policeman of, your your town, and they've got to catch the bad guys. So you've got this idea of the sidekicks of your sheriff. So the idea is this: you've got something intense coming at you. You are not alone.
Yeah.
And the idea is that for the most part, a lot of us somehow have been educated, whether it's by, the way that we've been brought up in education, our culture, that you're up against this alone.
Yeah.
And that you got to do it all by yourself. And it's hard and it takes a lot of effort, but with enough effort, you win.
And you got to be independent. You got to be independent. Yes. And self-sufficient.
Yes. Oh, yes. And then, and that's when, the kind of tools or artillery we use for this is having, in the corporate world, great data. Great data, great business cases, and you can, refute what everybody says and so on. So even with all this, because as I've just mentioned before, that 70% of your communication is coming through your body, that is not fully communicated through. Your data and your business cases are communicating in that 30% range. There's a whole lot more of potential that everybody could be using so that your whole message is felt by your listener, by your audience, by the people that you want to motivate. So if they can feel you, they can feel touched by your message. And that's how, when we're saying the most inspiring leaders, think about country leaders.
Yeah.
When you're able to motivate a whole country together to unite people, it takes a much more inspiring message. And that's the kind of messages that people can feel. If they can't feel you, they cannot feel touched by your message, then they wouldn't be stepping into you. The essential message is that sense of, we're in this together.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the key leadership competencies that we hone in on in LE, of inclusiveness. So in that way when we're centered, that can be embodied, the inclusiveness. Coming round to why then is the posse important? It's because alone, like you say, alone, well, we just haven't got that much juice. And there are days when we're tired, and there are days when we're not as inspired as we could be. But we could, as a tool, call upon people, inspiring elements for ourselves, and be able to remind ourselves of the bigger picture, and be able to use that as a kind of trampoline so that we can feel more juicy. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So for me, I use a landscape.
Okay.
And everybody's got something, very unique. And during workshops, I work with people around this. I invite, us to have time to explore this for ourselves. So in my case, there's several ones. And the one I want to share today is a landscape. It's a landscape in which I feel it's the safest place I feel on earth. And I have a very clear image of what that is. I have a photo of it. And I get myself very familiar with it. So it's not just some picture in my brain, but I actually have that in my space in front of me. I have that on my screensaver. And now what happens is that when I'm up against stress, when I'm up against something, and if there are the times when I don't feel safe, I call upon that, which is my inspiration. So that becomes my posse.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to necessarily be a person. And I have that in my space. And I imagine that and it takes practice. I imagine that in a very specific way that we train with in class for that that sense of well-being to come through me. And then I speak. And we experiment because we get this wonderful feedback from the people that we're training with so they can feel the before and after. What's it like when I'm speaking from my personality triggered self? When I'm scared, when I'm doubtful, when that comes up, when I'm triggered. And then when I switch and I call upon not just use my centered presence, but then juice myself up with something that inspires me, such as a landscape. And then I speak. And then the person gets to, my partner gets to give me good and useful feedback about how that feels. And I have never come across an occasion where there has not been a change.
Yeah.
In the many, many classes that I've taught.
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell?
It does ring a bell. And I've used it so many times. If I'm speaking about something and I used to I'm a NIA teacher, and I would go to class and teach, and I would feel, the kind of the presence of my trainer with Debbie, the founder. And it's like, oh, okay, gives me a boost that I'm not doing this alone. And it helped me also in having conversation, just having the presence of that calm person in my imagination and I've used Wendy many times herself, because her,
yes,
just she has a presence that it's very calming for me, just from the 4 or 5 days that we spent during the training. So it really helps, and it resonates a lot with that I can't be doing something on my own. And as you mentioned personalities. Wow, we're coming to the end of this episode. That time flew by. Now, the curiosity that I have, and it always comes up when I see individuals doing great work. And even though what they're doing is not a mainstream, where I would say, where the money comes from and where everyone is, knows about, because I know this work takes a lot of effort. Hopefully it's becoming more mainstream in these years. So what drives Chet to do this work, to talk with me today, to say, I want to have Ellie and this way of being more in the world? What drives you?
Well, this work is inspiring for me. It's inspiring for me because I more and more recognize a lot of creative beauty in the people I'm around with, the people who I'm in contact with, both who come in, students, the all sorts of partners that I speak with at the conferences I speak with, and what has people show up and take an interest. And I am seeing that in all those moments, people are reaching out for, and I'm also been coaching for a long time, and so I'm speaking not just during LE time. I'm just speaking in contact with people and seeing whenever people are doing their greatest work, that they're embodying the most of their truth and their own beauty of their qualities. And so this is inspiring for me. It gives me a lot of energy. And I felt it for myself. How many times when I can't imagine, how am I going to get there? And somehow it happens. And I think a lot of it is in having a form, a discipline, and having great teachers such as Wendy and many others. And I think for me, it's been so worthwhile. And I definitely intend to keep going on my own journey. So I want to, in whichever most creative expression that is appropriate of the times, be continuing to express this so that it could also be inspiring for other people to continue. And it's such a gift, like I mentioned before, it's this great act of generosity for ourselves and for our others. And, if anybody who wants to make some kind of impact in the world, and we're thinking, the 25 years ago me was thinking, I was having this sort of dark night of my life and thinking, I do want to make an impact and I want to be positive, but how do I do it? And I'm all those times when you're feeling all alone, and it's any little step helps.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad all of you are listening today, because there is some kind of a connection that has us here. And so if you're listening to this, even in that one breath, that inhale up our spines, uplift, softening through our front, expanding. And even in that one breath, we're making a difference. It's not about, flipping climate change and getting us to Mars necessarily. I'm not saying that's not, one of the many creative forms, but in that one breath, we're getting ourselves together in the best way that we can be in that moment. It's so precious. And then it's accumulating those moments after moments and just being there for ourselves and not abandoning ourselves, being that available to other people, great generosity. So I'm very much an advocate for that. And that's what has me here. That's what has me putting out these many classes. And I hope to have one coming up in your neck of the woods soon, perhaps, yes, to be able to share some of these beautiful practices that have brought me so much. Yeah, I think just brings so much more brightness in people's lives.
Yeah, beautiful. I really hope that we can have LE, Leadership Embodiment, grow here in Saudi and the region, because it's precious work, and it really it changed a lot in how I look at things and do things. But you said it so many times, and I want to highlight it, is the practice. So just the practice of consciously breathing, lifting up and softening with the down the front with the exhale, that of itself is a practice. And if, we want to get something out of it, we got to do it more often. But I really hope that in the near future, I could, see you in person here in Saudi, and have you share this work and this passion and this inspiration. How would people find you, and what books that comes up? I mentioned Leadership Embodiment, Wendy's book. If you have any other resources to share with us, with our listeners, would be great.
Yes, I'll be happy to. Actually, I don't know why this one is coming up. Yeah. It's a real oldie. This book, which I have in mind, it's called The Silent Pulse. And I have just bought for myself a collector's copy because it was printed 2 years after my birth.
That's George Leonard, correct?
Yes, 1976 by George Leonard. And George Leonard was, a leader in the human potential movement. He had he was a co-founder at the Tamalpais Aikido dojo, where that Wendy is still running now. And so it's been for a long time. And George Leonard's a real hero of mine. And it's one of the reasons why and how I was drawn to Wendy's work and leadership embodiment. And so check that out, The Silent Pulse. Mm-hmm. You can find that probably also on an audio or digital version. And it's sort of the those early seeds of, it's a very seminal work that has come to a particular form as leadership embodiment. Mm-hmm. But it's really beautiful. And one of the images that I have this moment is how he describes two human heart cells when they're in petri dishes, and you put them close together, you put them next to each other, and they can come from two different beings, and they begin to beat and to pulsate at the same rate. And there is something so beautiful about that because, nobody needs to tell them to do that. Nobody needs to give them a strategy, a business case, or anything. It just happens. So the wonderful thing about embodied work, and I'm not just, speaking for LE, but whichever form draws us in now and in the future, it's that the beautiful thing is that your body just needs to show up and things will happen by themselves because we have that wisdom. It's not even ours. It's just that the wisdom just is. So the Silent Pulse is such a lovely reminder of that. So that's something to invite all of you to. And it's, I think you were speaking of your question about how people can find me. Mm-hmm. So the website for Leadership Embodiment globally is just leadershipembodiment.com. The Asia specific is Leadership Embodiment Asia, all in one word.com. And here you'll find more specifically the schedule of all the goings-ons in Asia, including some of the conferences going on here, and my email.
Yeah, I'll put all that in the show's notes. Beautifully said, shared. I love that the last thing about the two heart cells, and we're all connected, and we're all doing our best to show up and have an impact and make this world a better place. Ched, thank you so much. This has been delightful. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I feel like we can go on. Again, hope to see you here soon, and because I personally want to take LE Level 1 again. It's been 5 years now. I think I need a refreshment. So thank you again, and hope to see you.
Yes, absolutely. It's been fun and pleasurable for me too. It's such a delight to reconnect.
Yeah.
And so just, give me a shout when you need me. You'll know how to find me. And I'll be happy to also share more if there are other areas of embodiment of specific interest to delve into and go deeper into. That could be fun too.
Yeah.
So all the best to everybody.